Have you ever been watching a movie, maybe a thriller, and you realize your heart is just pounding, but nothing physically scary is even on the screen yet?
Oh, yeah.
That's the power of the score. Film music is so much more than background noise. It's it's like the unseen director of your emotions. It's the hand that's controlling how you feel.
And that control has evolved so dramatically. I mean, today we're going to track that whole history. We're going from, a single piano in a dusty theater all the way to huge orchestras and computer-generated sounds.
It's a huge journey.
It is. We're basically tracking how music went from being a practical necessity to, well, almost a form of psychological warfare.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning then. The silent era. Before recorded sound, movies were, well, silent films. But they weren't really quiet, were they?
Not at all. Almost every single screening had live music played right there in the theater.
So a real musician was always there.
Almost always. And that musician had two very different jobs. One was practical and the other was purely artistic.
What was the practical one?
Well, it really came down to the machinery. The old film projectors were incredibly noisy. The motors, the hand cranks, they made a huge racket.
Ah, so it was distracting.
Hugely. It would completely pull you out of the story on screen, so the music was there to cover it up.
So they hired musicians to serve as acoustic cover,
Yep.
like an early, very expensive form of noise canceling.
Precisely. But that second job, the artistic one, that's what really defined the art form. Emotional guidance.
Because there are no spoken words.
Exactly. The audience needed help figuring out what the characters were feeling just from, facial expressions. If the music suddenly got frantic, you knew there was danger.
Or if it got sad and slow, you knew something tragic just happened.
Right. And the experience was totally different depending on where you were.
It wasn't uniform at all.
Not even close. A small local theater might just have a pianist, maybe a small organ.
Yeah.
But the big city movie palaces, in New York or London, they had full symphony orchestras.
And to make that a bit more consistent, composers started creating these music books, right?
They did. These were huge binders of sheet music, all categorized by mood. You'd have a section for excitement, grief, villain's entrance, things like that.
So the musician's job was to flip to the right page at the right time.
And do it seamlessly.
Yeah.
Their skill was judged on how perfectly they could time those transitions to the action on screen. It was an incredibly high-pressure job.
That sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
But then all of that completely vanished in 1927.
This is, I would argue, the biggest technological leap in the history of film. The movie The Jazz Singer.
Right.
It introduced the world to synchronized sound.
And what that means is that the music, the voices, everything was recorded directly onto the film strip itself. It was locked to the image.
Which is just a massive change. Suddenly, every single theater, no matter where it was, heard the exact same soundtrack.
The same music, the same emotional cues, everything.
And all that power shifted to the director. They, along with the composer, now had total control over what the audience heard. Storytelling could become way more sophisticated.
But a leap like that, it must have had some victims, so to speak. It must have caused a huge upheaval.
It did. A lot of famous silent film stars, people known for their physical acting, their careers ended overnight because their voices just weren't right for the new microphones.
And the theaters themselves had to change.
Oh, it was financially devastating for many of them. They had to spend a fortune on new equipment to play these new talkies.
But the upside was huge for composers. The job became a permanent, crucial part of making a movie. The art of film scoring was really born then.
And that takes us straight into the 1930s and 40s, the golden age of Hollywood scores.
This is when the music just got grand. Huge orchestras, really powerful, emotional sounds. It was all very influenced by classical music.
Very much so. A lot of the big composers of the era, like Max Steiner and Erich Korngold, had actually moved from Europe to Hollywood. They brought that sophisticated classical training with them.
And they used a central technique, a specific tool called the leitmotif.
The leitmotif is, well, it's basically a way to manipulate the audience psychologically. You assign a specific melody, a little theme song, to a character or an idea or even a place.
The most famous example is probably the shark theme in Jaws.
That's a perfect modern example. It's a technique borrowed from opera, and it's incredibly powerful.
So when the hero shows up, you hear their heroic theme. But what's the deeper benefit for the storyteller? Why do that?
It's like musical shorthand. It creates predictive emotion. The composer can, say, quietly play the villain's theme even when the villain isn't on screen.
And you instantly feel tense. You know something bad is about to happen.
Exactly. It lets the music tell you things the characters don't know yet. It was used so much back then that the music was almost constant, playing through the whole movie, like an opera with dialogue.
And the studio's really invested in this.
Oh, heavily. They built their own music departments and had hundreds of professional musicians on staff. It was its own little industry within the bigger industry.
But that grand classical sound couldn't last forever. By the 1950s, things started to change.
It was a real cultural shift. Filmmakers wanted movies to feel more like the real world, more like the streets, not just a concert hall. So they introduced jazz.
Right, instruments like the saxophone and the trumpet, it gives everything a grittier, more urban feeling.
And composers like Alex North and Elmer Bernstein, they used that new sound to change the focus. It wasn't just about good versus evil anymore. The music started focusing on the psychological state of the characters.
So it became more internal.
Much more. Instead of huge, sweeping themes, you get smaller arrangements. Sometimes composers would even use dissonant sound notes that clash on purpose, just to make you, the audience, feel the character's anxiety.
Then in the 60s and 70s, another huge change. Pop music.
Yes, the rise of the pop soundtrack. Directors started using songs that people already knew from the radio.
Like in The Graduate with Simon and Garfunkel, or the rock songs in Easy Rider.
It was a brilliant move, really. It connected with younger audiences, and just as importantly, it was often way cheaper than hiring a full orchestra for months.
And the soundtrack itself became a product, an advertisement.
Absolutely. The soundtrack album could become a huge hit on its own, selling millions of copies. The music started marketing the film before anyone even saw it.
The only risk there, I guess, is that pop music can really date a film. A classical score can feel more timeless.
That's the trade-off. But just when it seemed like the big orchestral score was over, it came roaring back.
In the late 1970s, and you have to talk about John Williams in Star Wars.
You have to. He proved that audiences still loved that huge, heroic symphonic sound for big adventures.
He brought back the leitmotif in a massive way.
Masterfully. You have the theme for Darth Vader, the theme for the Jedi. He recorded with dozens and dozens of musicians to match the fast-paced action and the incredible special effects.
It was a reminder that for some stories, you just need that epic orchestral scale. But right around the same time, technology was offering a totally different path.
The 1980s and the rise of electronic music and synthesizers.
This meant one person could create an entire score in their studio.
And it was much, much cheaper than an orchestra. But more than that, it created a whole new sound. Think of films like Blade Runner or The Terminator.
Yeah, that cold, robotic, futuristic feeling. You just can't get that from a violin.
You can't. And that really brings us to where we are now, where composers often mix the best of both worlds. You'll hear a big orchestra blended with all sorts of unique electronic sounds.
And speaking of mixing, the 90s saw this huge trend of using global influences, world music.
That became really important as Hollywood films started being set all over the globe. Composers like Hans Zimmer were brilliant at this.
If the movie is set in a specific place, the music should reflect that.
Right, so they'd blend in African drums or Asian flutes or different vocal styles to make the movie feel authentic and speak to a global audience.
Okay, but what about all those movies that use existing popular songs? Who's the person that finds that perfect, obscure 80s track that makes a scene unforgettable?
That is the incredibly important job of the music supervisor.
They don't write the score.
No, their job is to choose and license all the pre-existing songs, and it is a very, very complex job.
I bet the legal side of it is a nightmare.
It's massive. The supervisor has to negotiate with record labels, publishers, artists, all to get the legal rights to use even a few seconds of a song. They're the ones who find that perfect track that just locks a scene in your memory forever.
And what about the opposite of that?
That's-
What about scores that are really quiet?
You're talking about a more recent trend, minimalist and ambient scores.
Right.
Instead of a big melody telling you what to feel, these scores create a mood, a texture. They use simple, repeating patterns and soft drones. Think of films like Arrival.
The goal isn't to be noticed. It's to stay in the background and just support the emotions quietly.
Exactly. It lets you focus on the dialogue and the realism. It proves that sometimes near silence is just as powerful as a full orchestra.
So let's say the film is shot, it's edited. How does the composer actually get the music into the movie? What's the process?
It all starts with something called the spotting session. This is a meeting where the composer, the director, and maybe a music editor all sit down and watch the final cut of the film together.
And they decide where the music goes.
second by second. They decide where a piece of music should start, where it should stop, and what it's supposed to make the audience feel. They literally spot the cues.
I've heard that can be a tense process, especially if the director used temporary music during editing.
That's often the biggest challenge. A director might fall in love with their temp track, and then the composer has to either try to imitate it or convince the director that their new original music is actually better for the film.
Okay, so once they've spotted the film, the composer goes off and writes.
Right. They'll compose the melodies and record demos, usually with digital software that can sound a lot like a real orchestra. The director has to approve that digital mock-up.
And then comes the expensive part.
Then comes the recording. They bring in all the professional musicians, record it on a big stage, and then finally the sound engineers mix that music with the dialogue and all the sound effects.
The footsteps, the explosions, all of it.
Everything has to be balanced perfectly for when you finally see it in the theater.
So we've come this incredible way, from a single piano just trying to cover a projector noise, all the way to a point where composers have virtual instruments, maybe even AI helping them write.
And yet, despite all that technology, the goal is exactly the same as it was 100 years ago.
To tell a story.
And to use sound to create a deep emotional connection with the audience. The entire history of film music is just a story of innovation, always looking for a better way to bring those images to life.
So as music keeps evolving, I guess the big question for the future is this. If technology can perfectly synthesize emotion in music, will the audience still need the human composer or just the human idea behind it?
That is the question.
Good luck with your studies.